Welcome to another Stop BS Now English class podcast. This will cover part 3 of 1984. I'm joined today by no one. Another soliloquy. This is a great part to be looking at. Again, let me share the screen. You'll be seeing a lot of the screen, not me. I'm not really worth looking at. Here we go. Part 3. Well, again, I have to comment that it's shocking that this book actually is read in newspapers. Oops, did I say newspapers? Is read in high schools. Why is it shocking? Well, I mentioned something in my previous podcast, but today I'd like to focus on the fact that part 3 is a satire, a hideous satire, frightening satire of school. Essentially, it identifies school with brainwashing and a form of torture. I think there are lots of students out there who can identify with that. This insight, let me credit myself, flatter myself a little. This insight was made a few months ago when I reflected on Orwell's concept of room. Is it 201? 101? I think it's 201. And suddenly I remembered, isn't that number used to identify university courses? The basic ones, of course, with the 01 ending. So then I began to reflect, perhaps I think Winston enters room 201 in chapter 5. We'll see. Upon realizing that, I began to reflect that perhaps the entire part 3 is a parody of school education. And sure enough, that made quite a bit of sense, as we shall see. The last element I want to draw your attention to is a number of allusions to Friedrich Nietzsche's masterpiece, Thus Spake Zarathustra. I'll point them out when we get there. They are important because without them, 1984 is essentially a piece of is a hopeless document about our past, present, and perhaps future. So without those illusions, we'd have to identify Orwell as an absolute pessimist and perhaps cynic. With that said, let's examine some of the evidence. First page of chapter 1. We have the first of a number of references to lavatory toilets. Of course, toilets are a big part of our training experience in preschool and perhaps, sadly, beyond. A lavatory pan with no wooden seat. There was a dull aching in his belly. Of course, these basic and somewhat primitive needs, the needs of the child. Hunger, toilet, love. Of course, love. Well, we'll see how that develops. He does have access to a toilet, but poor Winston, no love until quite a bit later. Excuse my lack of scrolling ability. He's already learned to sit still. An important skill to have in the schools. If you don't learn that quick, you won't last. If you made unexpected movements, they yelled at you from the telescreen. sound a bit familiar? Teachers having no patience with those restless, fidgety children who are now all drugged. Well, not all of them, but far too many. They call it, what's it called? Attention deficit disorder syndrome, hyperactivity syndrome, whatever nonsense they want to attach it to it. Rather than making education interesting, yes, just blame the children for not paying attention. Very effective approach. Always blame others, even the children. Smith, yelled a voice from the telescreen. Hands out of your pocket. Pockets. Hands out of pockets while you're in the cell, in the classroom. Yes, keep your hands on the table. I think a few people have heard that before. Trying to restore order down there. Again, challenge every teacher understands. Good grief, I've got to speak to these Adobe Reader people. Called in by, there we go again. Technology rebels constantly. Called in by nicknames and tried to wheedle cigarettes through the spy hole in the door. Nicknames common enough in elementary school and beyond perhaps too. Trying to get cigarettes. Okay, we're going a bit outside of school references. An enormous wreck of a woman aged about 60 with great, yes, someone sits on poor Winston, almost crushing him. Not sure why I highlighted that. She hardly noticed him. They wrenched, oh, there we go. They wrenched off the boots with which she had been trying to kick them. This sounds a lot like naughty children having to be physically subdued. Yes. Now I must comment too that as we are presently in this coronavirus drama, we're all locked up so much like Winston. We are all Winstons now. Well, yes, we are all being treated like kindergartners. Big Brother has told us to lock ourselves up. He doesn't want to do it himself. Too much trouble nowadays. And he's got the perfect rhetoric for it, the Corona drama script. Very well. He felt this massive truncheons on his elbows and iron-shod boots on his shins. He saw himself groveling on the floor, screaming for mercy through broken teeth. Yes, well, in Winston's case, the fear is real. Fear of disobedience leads to actual pain and punishment. Will I get the coronavirus if I disobey? Don't make me laugh. But I will be punished if I disobey it. Some rather draconian laws have already been passed here in land of civility, Canada. We can now get fines up to $100,000 for sitting on swings in a public park. Sounds reasonable to me. I just give you random examples. There are so many more. Sometimes he tried to calculate the number of porcelain bricks in the walls of the cell. I think I've been that bored myself a number of times in school, in churches. I think everyone has doodled a little bit, if not counted bricks. If you're denied doodling instruments, I guess you might be reduced to counting bricks. The poet Ampleforth shambled into the cell. The door clanged shut again. Well, the poet gets no respect in our schools, neither does he get any respect here. in the cell. Oh, it is room 101, not 201, but regardless. The whole history of English poetry has been determined by the fact that the English language lacks rhymes. Oh, what a half true yet an inane observation. I'd say the whole history of English poetry has been determined by the fact that the upper class will not tolerate too much truth, too much criticism, too much critical thinking. Yeah, if you're wondering why Shakespeare is, well, I have said too much about Shakespeare already. And if you wonder why schools prefer to read Shakespeare over Byron or The Mask of Anarchy, who wrote that? Not studied in high schools for some reason. Yes, those authors and books are a little too rebellious, I think, for our teachers. Here are some memories of, well, who is it? Parson, yes, he's the man with the religious name. He is essentially a parson, now serving government rather than God, trying to excuse his, or trying to make light of the fact that his own child reported him to the authorities. Yeah, we are there again, and I say again, it's not the first time our governments have rewarded people for tattling on innocents and critics, whistleblowers, rebels. It's the norm now. Soon they'll be blowing whistles so loud we won't be able to take a step outdoors without hearing whistles. You're standing too close to someone. Into jail you go. He plumped his large posterior into the lavatory pan and covered his face with his hands. He's on the point of crying. It's just like kindergarten, where all our emotional children suffer. Of course, the suffering could happen at home too. Bumpstead roared voice 2713 Bumpstead. Let fall that piece of bread. Oh, there's some hungry child there trying to eat a scrap of, well, I'd call it junk food. My understanding of junk food is a little broader than most. Or threats of room 101. That's the equivalent of hell. They have room 101. Our schools, well, we don't have a room 101, or do we? We used to have straps. Yeah, we actually used to have physical punishment. Even in civilized Canada, I was the lucky recipient on numerous occasions of what was called a strap for committing such violations as speaking in class, being too sociable, wandering off school property. I'm sure I committed a few other crimes, such as walking on the school roof, for which I was never caught. But let's proceed. The two sturdy guards had stooped to take him by the arms, but just at this moment he flung himself across the floor of the cell and grabbed one of the iron legs that supported the bench. He had set up a wordless howling, like an animal, or like a child panicking, not wanting to be manhandled by larger adults. Presently, hunger gave way to thirst, the basic needs of the child and the human being. Here's Winston remembering the pain, the unbearable pain in his elbow. Chapter 2, he's moving on beyond toilet training and physical punishment. Wait, it's moving on to, yes, there's no more toilet, but there will be new forms of physical punishment. We'll get there when we get there. Don't be too impatient. The beatings, there you go. The beatings grew less frequent and became mainly a threat, a horror to which he could be sent back at any moment, with his answers. When his answers were unsatisfactory. His answers were unsatisfactory. It does sound a whole lot like school. Yes, well, we don't get beatings anymore. We have evolved beyond corporal punishment. Now we just get bad grades, no future, so they warn you. Although we all know that the richest people don't actually go to university. Not that wealth equates with success. They slapped his face, wrung his ears, pulled his hair. It sounds very much like elementary school. Not that, yeah, well, I think you get my gist. You may not remember, but others do. There were also memories of another kind. They stood out in his mind disconnectedly, like pictures with blackness all around them. Winston is a lot like a child. He doesn't have much memory of the past. Here he's strapped into a chair, surrounded by dials under dazzling light. He's graduated into high-tech torture. I think I have a little note coming on one of these pages. I shall save you. I shall make you perfect. Big promises from O'Brien, the great teacher, molder of young men. Here we go. Milgram's experiment. I couldn't help but notice the parallel. Anyone hasn't read or studied Milgram's experiment, please do. It's great evidence that any hierarchy leads to the degradation of the human spirit. All forms of hierarchy are corrupting, not because those on top simply get rich quick and abuse their power, but because there's a psychology involved in hierarchy, the psychology of blindly trusting and taking no responsibility for one's actions because one assumes one's leader or one's superiors are in charge and therefore responsible. One begins to be a slave in any hierarchy. More than a slave, I suppose the better word is thoughtless and stupid. As stupid as one's ruler needs one to be. We have here, how can you control memory? So much of the brainwashing happening depends on Winston remembering what he's supposed to say. And that, of course, is very much sums up education. It's rote learning, it's memorizing. Students rarely get to discover things on their own. That's not how I teach. I have learned things from students. I have congratulated them for revealing new things to me. But I tell you, Winston, that reality is not external. Reality exists in the human mind and nowhere else. Solipsism and relativism. Are we headed there? Are we living in our own minds? Are we ignoring the real world, the physical world? Is school encouraging us to do so, teaching us to do so? Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a little note on this side here, um, where Winston is being taught to ignore the four fingers and claim that four fingers are really five. It reminded me, of course, of basic maths, but more importantly, of basic brainwashing. Our children believe in what they do not see: rising oceans, warming weather, greenhouse gases, germs, God, good governments, peace and progress. None of these things exist. Um, sorry, greenhouse gases, yes, they might exist, but are they actually responsible for the way our climate is behaving? I doubt it. What are our children ignoring? What are we ignoring? Um, well, we're ignoring that cities are, coastal cities and cities maybe generally are sinking, uh, thanks to the sheer weight of cities and thanks to our drawing largely water out of aquifer. This is causing cities to sink. Perhaps most notably, is it Jakarta, capital of Indonesia? But it's a worldwide problem. What else are we ignoring? Chemtrails. We're not listening to our own bodies. The disappearing of nature. I see people going to our local lakes here and remarking how beautiful the lake is, how clean it is. And I want to say, are you blind? It's not clean, it's dead, it's empty of life. Maybe that's how people prefer it. Other good examples, how about the poverty, the war that rages around the world, income inequality, corruption. We are becoming increasingly aware of these problems, I think. But more on that later, if I remember. Here, O'Brien is rewarding Winston for his good behavior. He's making progress. He claims he no longer recognizes four fingers as four fingers. He does not know. O'Brien likes that. Gives him his reward, a little injection, a little intoxication. Is that like school? Maybe one day they will reward you for good behavior with an extra vaccination. Goodness. I hope I'm not too prophetic. O'Brien smiled slightly. You are a flaw in the pattern. Winston, you are a stain that must be wiped out. That sounds rather harsh, but that is how they treat anyone who thinks independently, anyone who thinks critically, anyone who dares to suggest that teachers might want to introduce more meaningful topics into classrooms. My own daughter tried to introduce or tried to persuade her teacher that geoengineering should be studied, and that she might pursue that in her independent research project. The teacher revealed her ignorance of the subject, initially expressed interest, returned a day later, probably after reviewing all the BS on the subject, and denied my dear girl the permission to pursue that research. She's a very independent mind now, as are other of my students. Page 1984. Does Big Brother exist? Of course he exists. The party exists. Big Brother is the embodiment of the party. Does he exist in the same way that I exist? You do not exist, said O'Brien. Well, yes, your leaders exist, but you do not exist. In what way is this supposed to make sense? Well, is it possible that O'Brien really means that Winston is really irrelevant? He is a cog, a slave who exists only by virtue of being permitted to exist, and is only permitted to exist if he acts like an extension of his masters. He's not allowed to make decisions for himself. Therefore, he doesn't exist. That's a lot like many of our students. In fact, many adults who are employees really don't exist. They are order takers, order followers. They are all in their cubicles, in their boxes. They don't know what anyone else is doing virtually, and simply do what they do because someone told them to do it. This is happening right now. No one is asking questions. Everyone is trusting the authorities, the so-called experts. If they tell you you're sick, you must be sick. If they tell you it's because of a virus, must be. Don't bother doing any research. No need. Just trust your authorities. There are 3 stages in your integration, said O'Brien. There is learning, there is understanding, and there is acceptance. Anyone notice that learning and understanding are essentially synonymous? So how do they represent 2 distinct stages? O'Brien either doesn't know what he's talking about or is making a mockery of his listeners. You have read the book, Goldstein's book, or parts of it at least. Did it tell you anything that you did not know already? Oh, O'Brien wants a little book report. Yes, we are in school. Winston is surprised. You have read it? I wrote it, O'Brien claims. That is to say, I collaborated in writing it. Well, I thought it was Emmanuel Goldstein who wrote it. Emmanuel Goldstein. Emmanuel, of course, one of the titles of Jesus, I believe, in the Old Testament. Goldstein, a rather Jewish-sounding name. It's a kind of Bible, you see. And here, O'Brien is claiming that he co-wrote it. The implications are rather interesting, isn't it? Also reminiscent again of the Communist Manifesto. Are all these books corrupted, written by our masters, by people who have no intention of enlightening and liberating anyone? I'll leave that for you to decide. Although I do happen to have a couple of good books on the Bible posted on my website. What is it called again? StopBSNow.com. Well, according to O'Brien, the book outlines the gradual spread of enlightenment, ultimately a proletarian rebellion, the overthrow of the party. What note did I put here? Marx and the Communist Manifesto's vision, enlightenment is not Marxism. It is beyond any industrial, political civilization. Yes, it's just wishful thinking that people will rise up, especially on the basis of the book, Emmanuel Goldstein's book, There's nothing in there that could lead to a meaningful revolution, a constructive one. There's no vision of what paradise would or utopia would look like. And I think George Orwell took pains to avoid ever using words like anarchism, a word that really belongs in this book as a kind of a counterpoint to the totalitarian dictatorship Winston lives in. But no such word appears. And by coincidence, such words are not mentioned in classrooms. I do not know of any of my students who have had teachers discuss anarchism, at least not in any educational manner. You believe that human beings are not fit to govern themselves. Isn't that what all people implicitly believe? Ordinary people, or the masses, can't rule themselves. We can't have anarchy. We need governments. Never mind that governments are made of human beings, no better than the rest of us, often attracting the worst of us, since the promise of permanent employment and power always attracts the worst types. Not only the worst types, some persons with good intentions, I am sure, good but misinformed intentions. It is this: the party seeks power entirely for its own sake. Here we go, the first allusion to Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy. The will to power for him was the basis of civilization, of man, not the overman, but of man. Ultimately, the ruling class is not so interested in money. As some good analysts have pointed out, our wealthy elites can print wealth, can print money on demand. They already have too much money, more than they know what to do with. Although maybe that's not entirely true. They love to use it to promote more power, more centralized power, and perhaps more suffering for others, just because, well, they are sadists. We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means, it is an end. Well, that's a little, I believe, reference to the Soviet Union, the Communist Union. Communism was in theory supposed to be, what's the word? A doctrine that did not promote dictatorships, centralized governments. I believe those who pushed for the revolution actually promised that central governments or government would just be a temporary measure needed to help promote the conversion of the old Russia to the new Soviet Union. Of course, it never works that way, and historically all communist nations have had dictatorships. The individual only has power so far as he ceases to be an individual. That's O'Brien talking and teaching poor Winston, teaching him a lot of BS. This is pure dualistic thinking. The individual and society are not in conflict. These are not, they do not have opposing goals. It's just a lot of nonsense. What's best for me is best for everyone. in the ideal world, or if we are intent on creating that ideal world. If we're intent on staying in the capitalist world, or in a world with hierarchies, obviously there will be conflict between society and the individual. As on the one case, in the capitalist case, the individual seeks maximum wealth for him or herself, and in all hierarchies, individuals seek maximum power for themselves. Reality is inside a skull. You will learn by degrees. More solipsism. Here the word masters appears for the first time, a word often used by Nietzsche, but we'll get a better use of that word later. Religious perspective, as I've commented in an article published on globalresearch.ca, our secular world order is becoming is a reflection of the religious world order. Religion might be outdated now, but we have replaced it essentially with our secular order. Our rulers are now godlike, thanks in part to technology. And the whole system is religious. We have our rituals, elections, for example, wonderful, meaningless, pointless religious ritual. The schoolmaster, here we go, a nice allusion to schooling, not that we needed these extra allusions. At the here we go. Here is O'Brien, what's the word, dismissing the value of the hedonistic utopias that the old reformers imagined. I think Orwell may have in mind actual utopian thinkers, not to mention anarchist utopia, what do we call them? Utopianists, utopiasts. Hedonism, the philosophy of pleasure, minimizing pain. That philosophy was long ago degraded, mocked by the ruling class, the Catholic Church, I believe specifically. Here, O'Brien is describing a world in which everything will be based on fear, controlled by fear. That's where we are now, more than ever. Not that it just started, but our coronavirus drama has raised the fear volume considerably. I know I'm a kind of rather frightening person to on first impression, and perhaps even on prolonged impression, I become even more frightening. But I've never before noticed people avoiding me on the streets, even to the point of leaving the sidewalk, crossing a street where there are no stop signs, no crosswalks, no zebras, in order to access the opposite sidewalk and avoid being anywhere near me. I am that frightening. Well, not really me, I suppose, just my little potential germs. There will be no art, no literature, no science. Does that describe our education system? Absolutely. That describes our education system. We are destroying the arts. There's no art left. Literature, don't make me laugh. Here I'm sitting actually trying to teach what literature is about. It's used in the classroom, but it's certainly not taught. Does science still exist? Well, you can dissect the frog, but you cannot dissect the food and the toxic foods that they are feeding people. You can analyze just about everything except meaningful things. We shall have no more need of science. Indeed, once the ruling class has all its tools, absolute surveillance, absolute power over us, with perhaps weaponized 5G technology. Weaponized 5G technology. We should all be studying that. We noticed that earlier. Poor Winston was on an electric chair of sorts. Yes, we will all be on a sort of electrified world soon enough, a world that can be electrified against us. The intoxication of power, something that should be discussed in classrooms too. Although, of course, half of our teachers may well be intoxicated with power. So that might not be a popular topic for discussion. Another little lesson. Can you not understand that the death of the individual is not death? The party is immortal. Absolute nonsense. Of course, usually we do not talk about death, and we act as if we are immortals, as if the soul still existed in our minds, as if we were, well, I know socialism really pushed this line of thinking, a kind of group think, to become part of a group and to forget that you're an individual who will perish, who is mortal, and who should live carefully and prudently and not blindly trusting others. No, instead we are taught to view the world as if we are immortals, to not worry about any of the madness, not even to be aware of the madness out there, not to worry about GMO foods, not to worry about the toxins in our foods, not to worry about the weapons our taxes are paying for, not to worry about the untested technologies being distributed, purchased, used all over the world. I'm referring particularly to electronics like cell phones and the electrification of our environment, EMF, and the thousands of man-made chemicals that are killing us and that we don't identify, that might be business secrets. It's a madness. Okay, here we have some very good, one very strong reference, or sorry, allusion to Friedrich Nietzsche's work, The Last Man, a concept mentioned in his masterpiece, Thus Spake Zarathustra, Thus Spoke. I recommend it to everyone, and please ignore all the accusations that somehow his works were loved by the Nazis. Try to get beyond the propaganda. The Last Man, again, take off your clothes. What does Winston do? He immediately takes off his clothes. Very obedient student. Does what he's told, as most people do when they come to their doctor's offices. They will strip when told to, they will sit down, they will provide an arm, they will pay for the prescribed medicine, no questions asked. Never mind that you're living in a capitalist system in which everyone is out to make the most money from you possible. Don't worry about that. That couldn't possibly corrupt our civilization. It might be a long time, said O'Brien. You are a difficult case. Well, we don't give up. Everyone is cured sooner or later. That's a little too optimistic, O'Brien. I'm sure he has plenty of people who are not cured, as our own system has plenty of people. Like myself, not cured. I'm full of mental viruses. I'm just releasing them everywhere. as I speak, by speaking, indeed. Chapter 4, Winston is feeling better. He's growing fatter and stronger. Well, lucky Winston. After much suffering, Big Brother is spoiling him a little. And this will be critical to the brainwashing process. He's going to start loving Big Brother because he instinctively understands he's completely helpless. Well, partly that's his own fault. He did so little to rebel, virtually nothing. The food was surprisingly good, of course. He even gets cigarettes, meat. Well, should I comment on those luxuries? They're killing you, Winston. They're killing you again. After that, reluctant at first, he began exercising himself regularly. Yes, exercising in his cell. And he's thankful and happy. His mind grew more active. He sat down on the plank bed, his back against the wall, and a slate on his knees, and set to work deliberately at the task of re-educating himself. He's so happy now. He's going to brainwash himself. How could the immortal collective brain be mistaken? A rhetorical question asked by Winston. How could so many people be wrong? I believe that is a logical fallacy. I forget the Latin word for it, but it's one that's very common among us. People who think that if a lot of people do it, if a lot of people believe it, it must be true. It's a logical fallacy. Another popular one, if the experts say it's true, it must be true. Well, both are very tempting. I've already commented on the second one. I don't think the first one deserves a comment. It should be rather transparent that experts can abuse the public's trust, can abuse their authority, can be corrupted by a desire for money. Goodness. Maybe these things should be discussed in schools. Of course, O'Brien does not wish to discuss them. And Winston is stuck just wondering about them. Well, that was I'm referring to part 1, I suppose. But he doesn't even get that far. All happenings are in the mind. Whatever happens in minds truly happens. He had no difficulty in disposing of the fallacy. And he had no danger of succumbing. And he was in no danger of succumbing to it. Oh, he realized, nevertheless, that it ought never to have occurred to him. Yes, he knows it's BS, but he doesn't want to be aware of that knowledge. He wants to ignore it. To go through life thinking that whatever he thinks is beautiful is therefore beautiful because he thinks it is. Isn't that where half of our artists have arrived? And most of us who think whatever their opinions are on subjects like art is valid, regardless of how much experience and knowledge and thought they've put into their opinions. In your case, O'Brien, the worst thing in the world happens to be rats. Oh, yes. And the rats will be used to manipulate and finally convert Winston into loving Big Brother. And isn't that where we are now, right? Or where we were before, where we always are. We're quite almost always. We used to thank our governments for building nuclear bombs so that we could defend ourselves from the awful, terrifying Soviets. Now, we thank our governments for quarantining us so that we can not die of COVID-19. Yeah. And in the past, I think we wanted to thank our governments for what other nonsense. I hardly want to remember. Um, oh, well, we're always thanking our governments for something. People are afraid to live without governments. They really believe that their neighbors would rape and rob them the moment we lived in a world, the moment we live in a world without government. It's a sad state of affairs to think so badly of one's neighbor. Of course, the neighbor is thinking the same about you. It's really ridiculous. I want a better word. Ludicrous. Didactically. There's another word connected to education. Didactically meaning in a manner of teaching. And here, poor Winston has broken and asked for O'Brien to torture Julia, not him. It was Julia. She's the guilty one, not me, her pointing the fingers. It's so, I'd say childish, except good children are always better than that. Chapter 6, my opening note, Winston has graduated and entered the workaday world. Yes, he's got a new job, a better job, and he's so happy. That's all it takes. Everyone just wants a good job. Well, I'm sorry, my students and anyone who might be in, well, any school, but perhaps universities and colleges especially, it doesn't look like we got much of an economy for you to be fighting for. Don't look like that economy will come back anytime soon. Job opportunities, not coming anytime soon. High time we learn to take care of ourselves. And this little Corona drama might just be the lesson that will teach us that point. We'll see. Anything else worth adding to Orwell's lovely dystopian novel? Let's have a look. Nobody cared to be seen sitting too close to him. Did Orwell write this yesterday? You wonder. He had always plenty of money nowadays. He even had a job, a sinecure. I think that's how it's pronounced. More highly paid than his old job had been. Lucky Winston. Forget about the rest of the world. Forget about Julia. You're making money. You're doing well. You're prospering. Never mind the dust that's blowing behind your back. One last meeting with Julia. Should I call it a meeting? Near meeting. She walked obliquely away across the grass as though trying to get rid of him. Well, her job is done. She doesn't need him anymore. She hasn't changed because of some supposed torture she's endured. She's just over him, or no, over him. She was never under him, so she doesn't need him anymore. It was a momentary glance, full of contempt and dislike. Apparently, she doesn't feel any guilt for supposedly, what's the word, tattling on poor Winston. Of course she doesn't. So she framed him from the beginning. She led him into his demise, his masters, his enemies. She completely used him. she does here claim, of course, that she was also tortured, or she hints it. And perhaps once upon a time she was tortured, but it would have been well before, long ago, well before the novel started, well before she ever knew Winston. She was probably tortured and trained to become the very effective honeypot that she is. Of course, we might note here too that Winston was never really in a danger to the government. She really created the danger. She persuaded him to go to O'Brien. He would never have gone without her prompting him. So what was the point of it? Nothing except power. That's what they want. That's what they enjoy. She destroyed him, as she too was destroyed. You know, it's the power, the upper class, the elites. These are not normal or healthy people. They have all been deprived or suffered to some extent in ways that we might not be aware of, or we might not recognize, because it's normal. It's normal to be raised without good parents. It's normal to be thrown into a classroom. It's normal to be ignored by your father most of your life. Fathers are too busy. Mothers, their job is to be helicopter moms, as we call them now, chauffeurs for children, shipping them around. What kind of love is that? It's not really. So, not surprisingly, Winston had a difficult childhood himself, and he wasn't tortured. His mother tried his best, but there wasn't a childhood filled with love, a childhood filled with stress. So, not surprisingly, he went looking for love. Thought he found it in Julia, didn't find it there. And ultimately, it comes to him, or he embraces, let us say, the fake love offered him by who? By Big Brother. Here we go. The last lines. Oh, stubborn, self-willed exile from the loving breast. Now he's regretting that he didn't love Big Brother earlier. He's referring to Big Brother with this image of the loving breast. That really belongs to, I suppose, Julia or his mother. It's a feminine image. It's not the image of Big Brother, but Winston is being rather creative here and feminizing Big Brother, making Big Brother lovable. It was all right. Everything was all right. The struggle was finished. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. Hurrah. Just as implicitly, really, we all are taught to love Big Brother by our schools. Teachers, being employees of government institutions, are not in the habit of criticizing their governments, are not in the habit of promoting or encouraging students to think critically of their governments. So they instead promote the view that governments are great, that constitutions written by elites and confederations managed and masterminded by elites, that these things are good and are for the good of all. These are actions done for the benefit of everyone and are therefore evidence that your government is a big, loving Big Brother. Well, I hope that's been enlightening. I hope I'm done with this book for a while, and I hope we can all practice what George Orwell was teaching in a rather, perhaps a subtle way, although not very subtle once you realize what he's trying to say. And once you learn to think like him, it seems quite clear. In any case, that's enough for my classes on 1984. This is enough for another night of Stop BS Now podcasting. I hope you'll all be back. Maybe next time I'll have some students in the virtual classroom. Thank you and good night.